Hi, my name's Kay Higgins and I'm a mental health first aid instructor for Black Country Healthcare. Today I'm going to talk to you about the impact of stress and developing ways in which we can manage stress more effectively. I'll also talk about the importance of self-care, as when we're coping with stressful situations and life events, we can very easily forget about our own well-being and drop to the bottom of the list of priorities. Stress and self-care are both topics that are covered within the mental health first aid training and form an important part of the role of a mental health first aider. So, what is stress? Stress is the body's reaction to feeling threatened or under pressure. It's very common, and in the correct amounts it can be motivating and help us to achieve things in our daily life. It can also help us to meet the demands of home, work and family life. Some stress is good and can help us to accomplish tasks, but when is it not so good for us? Being able to understand and recognise when we're not coping as well is really important. Just to explain this concept in more detail, I've chosen to show you Yerkes-Dodson's curve, which is a model that we can all identify with regards to stress and stress levels. As we all know, a little bit of stress is healthy, and we can see from the diagram that our performance is shown on the left-hand side of the diagram marked performance. If we look at the left-hand side of the diagram, you will see the A arrow. This shows low performance, moving up through to the B arrow, which is high performance. Along the bottom, we have low stress levels on the left, moving through onto high stress levels, where the C arrow is pointing. As our performance increases, so do our stress levels, until we reach the optimum level. At this point, we are performing at our best, but this is also when we need to recognise our peak. It is all about balance, and if we begin to tip the scales and go over that peak, this is when we can begin to feel anxious, restless, and a feeling of loss of control of a situation. This is known as the zone of delusion. We all have our own stress signature, and sometimes others can spot it before we do. You may become louder, quieter, more snappy or irritated, withdrawn, or just become emotional. It's very different for everyone. However, being able to identify your stress signature can be extremely useful when learning coping strategies to control your stress levels. Here is another model that I would like to share with you, as it's something you can use when managing your own stress. We all have a stress container, and it will be a different size for different people. The size is something that is determined very early on in life. Some people will have a small container and some will have a large container. Our stress vulnerability levels are shown by the size of our container and can be determined by many different factors, such as a highly stressful occupation, genetic factors, or past trauma are just a few examples. This model shows how everyday stresses can pour into our containers and it begins to fill up. Sometimes the container continues to fill and will overflow and can result in emotional snapping or some of the other things that I talked about earlier. That zone of delusion has been reached. The good news is we do have a tap on our stress containers, which we can open to release some of our stresses before we overflow, and we can achieve this by practicing different coping strategies, which we will look at in a moment. Firstly, take a moment for yourself to try out this useful exercise. Draw your stress container on a piece of paper and write down all the things that you're worrying about or that are causing you stress at the moment. For example, you might not be sleeping, work pressures, illness, not being able to spend time with loved ones, financial stresses. These are just a few. Externalising your stresses can be really helpful for some people, as it can help you to clear your mind and prioritise tasks. But remember, not one size fits all, so it's all about what works for you. Now you've identified what is filling up your stress container, let's have a look at what you need to do. Remember, it's not a disadvantage to have a small stress container, you just need to remember to empty it more often, but this will result in you being more practiced at emptying it. If you have a large stress container, it takes longer to fill up, but you'll need to be more mindful when it's reaching the top, so you can open that tap before the last pebble drops in. So one of the ways that we can open the tap is by using positive coping strategies that work for us as individuals. So think about your coping strategies. It can be really useful to identify the differences between helpful and unhelpful coping strategies. How do you deal with stress? What do you do at the moment to release that stress? How are you looking after your own well-being? If you're not doing anything at the moment, Think about what you can do to open up your tap and release some of that pressure. Remember, you can't draw water from an empty well, so you need to look after yourself. Here are a few examples of helpful coping strategies. Things like writing a list can be really useful. Different forms of exercise, listening to music, working in the garden, watching something like Netflix or using another TV app or station, chatting on the phone to a friend or family member, going for a walk, reading a book. Different forms of meditation can be really helpful and relaxing, and yoga, gardening, or doing something really creative can all help. But what one person finds helpful, another might find it unhelpful. It's very individual. Now have a go at writing your own list of coping strategies, and then decide from your list if you think what you're doing at the moment is helpful or unhelpful. This way you can make changes if you need to, and you'll be an expert at opening up your tap. Remember, we all react differently and cope differently to stress. You may have heard the saying, you'll never know a man until you walk a mile in his moccasins, which means you never really know what another person is going through or what their life is like. Although many think this saying originated from various Native American tribes, it actually comes from a poem written by Mary T. Lathrop. It was written in 1895. The original title was Judge Soft, and it's a lovely poem which you can read the full version of online. People tend to use pressure and stress as though they were interchangeable terms, but they're not. Pressure, which is everywhere, is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. However, how we perceive this pressure can make a difference to the outcome. For example, if the pressure is perceived to have exceeded our perceived ability to cope, then this will result in stress. This response is normal and has nothing to do with weakness. It's a survival mechanism, and we still need it. To grow and to learn, we can learn to turn something that may be negative into something positive. Pressure acts as a catalyst for extending our range of coping skills. Whether you experience growth or stress from pressure is dependent on the way you process and filter the experience of it, as the diagram shows. Our perception of the demands that we feel are made upon us plays a big part in shaping the outcomes we get as a result. As these models show, we perceive external events through a series of filters that delete, distort or generalise what we see to build a story about what's happening. This in turn affects how we respond to it. A great deal of the sources of pressure that we experience are outside of our direct control, but the way in which we think about them and the actions that we take as a result are very much within our control. Remember, wisdom comes from multiple perspectives. By developing alternative viewpoints, you are directly improving your ability to adapt your thinking, feeling and behaviour, and therefore can learn to change your reactions and thoughts about a situation, and this can help you cope better. Remember, we are all unique. The good news is that in time we can learn to develop our skills to adapt our approach to certain pressures, and this in turn can change the outcome and the effect it may have on us as individuals. Now I'd like to share with you another way of managing stress, and this is called the 4 A's to stress management. Let's work through each of the steps together. The first A, avoid. Can you avoid a particular situation or person? Can you avoid unnecessary stress by saying no to something that will prevent you from doing your task? If you can't, move on to the next step. Look at the second A, which is alter. Can you alter the situation in any way? Or can you think of a way that you can react to it differently? Can you make it positive? By, say, state your limits in advance, manage time better, or communicate your feelings openly. The third A, adapt. Can you reframe the issue? Perhaps look at the bigger picture, or perhaps adjust your standards. And the final step, the fourth A, is accept. Are you able to talk to someone, practice positive self-talk, forgive and learn from your mistakes, perhaps prioritise tasks so they don't seem so overwhelming, but sometimes we just have to learn to accept. So now we've looked at the 4 A's to stress management, let's look at some other coping strategies and techniques you can try. Here's another quick technique. for coping with stress and anxiety in the moment. This is a grounding technique called 5-4-3-2-1. It can be really good when you need to take a moment for yourself, when you might be feeling overwhelmed or stressed and anxious. It can be really effective in bringing you back into the moment. So in your mind, take a deep breath and have a look for 5 things that you can see or spot around you. 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, and 1 thing that you can taste. This is another form of being mindful and in the moment. You can also try and identify in your mind as many breeds of dog as you can think of, as many cities that you can think of around the world, different countries, or even look for different shapes within your environment and count how many squares, how many circles, how many oblongs. They can all help to ground you. A simple tip to try to help you to stay in control so that you have a better chance of being able to choose the right emotional and practical response in pressurised situations is traffic light coping. This gets you into the right place to be able to choose a different internal story and behave differently. So think about the colours. Red is stop. Take a deep breath. Take time out or a break if you need one. Just a few minutes of downtime. Amber is think. Think, what is the problem? What are my options? Assess your options and possible consequences. How could I handle or approach this differently? And green is share. Speak to a person you trust about the issue. Consider and choose the option that you will feel will have the best outcome for you and others. If you work through the traffic light system, you'll be able to act from a calmer and clearer mindset. Sometimes we just need to take a deep breath, a step back, and have some time out. Here are some further steps to help you with managing stress. Number 1, being able to recognise your own warning signs is really helpful. Number 2, gaining an understanding of your triggers helps you to develop and adapt ways to control and in some cases avoid certain stresses. Number 3, establish what works for you. This is such an individual thing, and remember that just because something hasn't worked for one person doesn't mean it won't work for you. It can be trial and error, but well worth putting in the time and effort at this point. These will be tools you can always count on as you know they're proven to work for you. An example of this might be writing a to-do list and prioritising tasks. Even maybe having 2 lists, one for work and one for home. By writing everything down, we externalise it, and by breaking it into smaller chunks, it's easier to cope with, plan and deal with one thing at a time. This on its own will feel like a weight lifting off your shoulders. Number 4, think about who you can talk to and trust. Choose someone who will listen and be supportive in a non-judgmental way. Number 5, review and reflect on the situation. So you could ask yourself the following question. Did I have all the correct information and details? Did I look at all of my options and possible outcomes? Could I have said or done something differently? Am I happy with the outcome? And what would I change next time? We can all learn from experiences. This is how we learn and grow as individuals. Remember to take one day at a time. Here's a useful link to a useful workbook that you can complete in your own time. It takes you through these steps in stages. You can use this as your own action plan, and as it's written and developed for you, it's very personal and you can look back on it at a time when you need to, and it's a good reminder whenever you need it. So here's some food for thought. Think about what might be causing you worry and stress at the moment, and imagine a really close friend or loved one came to you with these very same worries and concerns. What would you say to that person? How could you support them? Would you be saying the same to them as you're saying to yourself? Be kind to yourself. I would like you to think about how you practice self-care. Remember, self-care is not selfish, so it's really important that we find ways to look after our own mental health and well-being. Any kind of exercise is really good for our mental health, such as going for a run, walking, skipping or swimming. Talking to family and friends using different communication platforms helps us to stay in touch with each other and stops us from feeling isolated. Eating well, getting enough sleep, all have a positive impact. We can do simple things such as having a long relaxing bath, Try out a new craft, listening to music, or even listening to motivational talks and podcasts can be really helpful. Some days can be really tough and exhausting, and it feels like everything has been a battle. But at the end of the day, no matter how hard or difficult it's been, think of 3 good things that have happened to you. They don't have to be big or profound. It could be that someone texted you and asked how you are, or someone made you a cup of tea, or a person thanked you for something that you've done. By doing this, you're reframing your day and going to sleep on a more positive, happier thought. The Action for Happiness website is full of ideas and resources for you to try. Remember, it's okay to not be okay. When we board an aeroplane, the cabin crew will talk us through the safety procedure, should anything happen whilst we're on board. They will tell you that in the event of something happening, you may find that an oxygen mask, which is located in the cabinet above your head, will drop down. You must ensure that you secure your oxygen mask before securing anyone else's. How many of us would do this? Remember, we can't serve from an empty vessel, and this is why you must make sure that you look after yourself first before you help and support someone else. This way you know you're giving them your best. Here are a few recommended websites that you may like to try. This is not a comprehensive list, as there are many more available online. If you prefer mobile applications, then here is a few that I would recommend. I hope you have found this useful, and I'd like to leave you with this to finish. When your head hits the pillow tonight, remind yourself that you've done a good job. You're headed down your path at your own pace, and with every obstacle you're trying your utmost best. Be patient with yourself and remember that big things are achieved, not all at once, but one day at a time. Thank you for listening.